Hello and welcome back to another episode of Walk Beside Me. I'm Brooklyn Bird, and as always, we are talking about how the gospel of Jesus Christ applies to parenting. We have a lot of new listeners as of late, so if you're new here, welcome. Thank you for listening. Today, I wanted to talk about some insights that I had in relation to a book that I recently finished reading. This book is called The Outward Mindset, and it is published by the Arbinger Institute. This is the second book that I've read that was published by the Arbinger Institute, and I loved it just as much as I love the first. The first one was Bonds That Make Us Free, which is written by Terry Warner, who's actually the founder of the Arbinger Institute. And then this one is The Outward Mindset, published by the Arbinger Institute generally. The Arbinger Institute is a leadership development organization that helps companies and organizations develop their leadership so that they can develop their people and increase the effectiveness of their organizations. I am acquainted with the Arbinger Institute because I have a friend who works there. Her name is McKinley. It's been really fun to learn more about the organization through her, and then also read the materials published by this organization because they truly are life-changing ideas, not only for businesses, corporations, but also for families. Anything that is true at a corporate level or at an organization level is also true at a family level. This is good news for us because there are actually a lot of really excellent leadership and organizational materials out there, not only from the Arbinger Institute, but just so many good leadership books in the world. And I think that a lot of parents are missing out because they don't read these, especially stay-at-home parents. They would never think to open a book that's about business leadership or how to grow and develop a team in a corporation. However, the principles that work at a large organizational level should apply at a smaller organizational level too. There are no inconsistencies in life. If you have struggled in the past to resonate fully with parenting books that you read, because there are so many out there and I personally haven't resonated with at least half the ones I've read, it might be helpful for you to spread your wings a little bit, get out there and read some general leadership or self-help, even business development books. There are a lot of really good principles that can apply within a family, can apply to our relationships as leaders to our children. One reason that I really like turning to these kind of resources is that I find that a lot of parenting resources tend to focus on methods. They tend to focus on, here are the strategies of how to get your kids to turn out a certain way. Here are the things you should say. Here are the things you should do. This is exactly the routine you need to have in your home in order to get this outcome. One of the biggest problems with that approach is that it almost assumes that there is something we can do as humans to control other humans. If we have the right formula, then eventually we can gain control over other people, which is so contrary to God's plan of salvation, his plan that intrinsically must include agency. Any advice that is founded on the idea that there's something you can do to control another person, that's a red flag for me. That's something that I'm going to question. The cool thing about a lot of leadership materials for like organizations and workplaces is that they assume that we're dealing with lots of adults who actually think for themselves and can act for themselves. They almost inherently respect agency, at least the good ones do. Unfortunately, a lot of parenting books set up this dichotomy between parents and children where parents are viewed as the authority and children are viewed as less than. They're viewed as subservient or not even full humans yet. They're viewed as irrational, like needing special training strategies for children. I tend to question anything that the writer of a book suggests is specifically for children, especially if the principle or the method that they're offering doesn't seem like it would be a healthy thing to employ in another relationship, whether that be in the workplace or in a marriage. So if you have become disenchanted with parenting books or even parenting reels, all the stuff you see on social media, that could be why a lot of that material is viewing our children as objects, not as whole people, and not employing true principles that would apply in any respectful, loving human relationship. All of this brings us to The Outward Mindset from the Arbinger Institute because this book is the exact opposite of that. It is very principle-based, and one of my favorite things about this book is that it places very high priority on a leader fixing his or her mindset before trying to change his or her behaviors, and especially before trying to change the mindset and behaviors of other people. It starts with the leader changing his or her own mindset. So this book isn't a laundry list of strategies of what to do to get people in your organization to comply or get on board with your ideas, but rather it is the frameworks and perspectives that you need as a leader to view people in order to come up with your own solutions to your own problems. I want to read a quote from the Arbinger Institute about this. They say, mindset training gets to the root of organizational challenges by fostering self-awareness designed to evoke empathy and challenge people to actually see differently before you even start to think about getting them to act differently. When people really see others, they will come up with the answers over and over. They will own the transformation and decide for themselves the right things to do to help be a part of the solution and achieve desired results. In other words, if we can get our mindset right and we can approach a situation with the proper mindset, we don't even need anyone else to tell us answers. You don't need to go on Instagram and comment on some parenting experts post and say, but what about my situation with kids these ages and one kid is doing this and one kid's doing that? You'll never need to do that, because if you can view your kids with the proper mindset, you will be able to generate the solutions on your own. They will naturally come to you. The mindset that this book is all about is having an outward mindset. Arbinger defines an outward mindset as a mindset that empowers us to recognize that those around us are people who matter as much as we do, and whose needs, objectives, and challenges are as worthy of consideration as our own. On the other hand, there is the inward mindset, which most humans have all the time, myself included. It is really easy to get into an inward mindset, and I actually think that when the scriptures talk about the natural man, another word for the natural man could be an inward mindset. It's this fear-based mentality where we are only trying to protect ourselves and we're in survival mode all the time. Arbinger says, an inward mindset is a way of seeing ourselves and others that keeps us focused on our own needs, wants, and goals, often at the expense of others. When we live and work with an inward mindset, we see people as objects rather than as people, as vehicles to be used, irrelevancies to be ignored, or as obstacles to be overcome, rather than as individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. Inward mindset tendencies can show up in various ways, such as blaming others, justifying our own mistreatment of others, or avoiding responsibility. When I read that, I think of all the ways that this totally shows up in families between parents and children. How often do we accidentally see our children as vehicles to be used? We see them as little proxies to live our lives through, and we want them to turn out perfectly so that we can use them to validate ourselves and make ourselves feel better about where we are in life. Or we see them as irrelevancies to be ignored. It's so funny that I often hear parents complain, oh, my toddler just has to have it her way. She's the boss, or she thinks it's her way or the highway, when really this is how most parents treat their children all the time, and they really don't take the time to consider why their children might be resisting their instructions or resisting the routine, and often ignore the root causes behind a child's behavior, just chalk their child up as irrational and disrespectful. Parents often also accidentally see their children as obstacles to be overcome. I'm guilty of this too. It's very easy to be focused on what I want to do, the way I see my day going, all the things that I want to get down on my to-do list, and forget that my daughter is not an obstacle to the things that I want to achieve. In fact, she is the most important thing in my life. There shouldn't be anything I'm doing that's more important than her, because it really is all for her. If I'm so preoccupied that I'm starting to see her as an obstacle, that is pretty ironic, because I'm the one that chose to bring her into my life. I'm the one that chose to have a child. And so I really signed up for everything that she is going to throw at me. Everything that she ever does or says or wants to do is something that I invited into my life. So it's really silly for me to see her as an obstacle when she's someone that I created myself. Arbinger continues to say this about having an inward mindset. When we choose to see people as objects, we look for ways to justify this choice and become invested in seeing them as less than ourselves, which invites them to respond poorly to us in return. Their responses, of course, justify our original choice to not see them as a person. This self-perpetuating cycle of justification seeking, mutual mistreatment, and blame characterizes most of our relationships when we are inward. Until we can escape this need for justification, we will continue to wallow in the problems that are to a large degree of our own making. Until we can learn to acknowledge the obvious truth that our coworkers, family members, and neighbors are as important and legitimate as we are, then our relationships will continue to be strained and the results we accomplish together much less than they could be. Basically, the whole premise of this book is that the best way to get what you want in life is actually to start by thinking of what other people want in life. When leaders shift to an outward mindset, they naturally invite the rest of the organization to follow. When an organization is operating from an outward mindset, the dynamic shifts from individuals to collective results and from singular gain to mutual reciprocity, resulting in a far better and sustained performance. The book shares a study by a McKinsey & Company that states that organizations that identify and address pervasive mindsets at the outset are 4 times more likely to succeed in organizational change efforts than are companies that overlook this stage. That statistic is so amazing. I'm going to state it again because I like it so much. Organizations that identify and address pervasive mindsets at the outset are 4 times more likely to succeed in organizational change efforts. In other words, if we want to become more successful in our family organizational change efforts, our efforts to change the way that we interact with our kids or the way that our kids interact with us, the best place to start is with our mindsets, with the way that we view our children. Are we operating from this fear-based scarcity mentality that is the inward mindset, or are we outward focused, really considering our children's perspectives, treating them as whole people who matter just as much as we do? The greatest example of having an outward mindset is Jesus Christ, of course. When he went and called Simon and Andrew to be his disciples, he didn't just show up and give them a lecture about why they should follow him, why it'd be a smart idea. He didn't talk about himself at all. In fact, he showed up and he took interest in what they were doing in the moment. He saw them as real people. What they were working on in that time really mattered to them, and that was fishing. Simon and Andrew had been fishing all night with no success. Jesus showed up and said, "Throw your nets on the other side of the boat." They did that, and they caught more fish than they could even carry in their boat. It wasn't a lecture from Jesus or him explaining all the reasons to follow him that encouraged them to want to follow him, but it was him taking interest in what they were doing and showing them that he was actually a master of it that inspired them to follow him. So the general idea, as I've explained of this book, is choosing to have an outward mindset rather than an inward mindset. One of the very specific applications of this idea that the book talks about is collapsing the trappings of leadership. When I explained this concept to my husband, he was like, "What does trappings mean?" Maybe I should explain just in case anyone else is wondering. Trappings, according to the Oxford Dictionary, are the outward signs, features, or objects associated with a particular situation, role, or thing. The book gives examples of what the trappings of leadership might look like at an organizational level. It might look like the executives having the best office space in the whole building, having the prime parking spot, segregating themselves into different cafeterias or more preferred parts of the building. The book encourages readers to consider whether the perks that the few enjoy could be made available to others. The book asks, can any trappings of Big-Shotness be removed? And if we treat and pay ourselves generally, are we appropriately generous as well with our employees? In this way, the book encourages readers to actively question the traditions and practices within their organizations to determine how they can collapse these distinctions between leadership and the quote-unquote subordinates in the organization. The more we can collapse these distinctions, the more unity the organization is going to have, and the more everyone's going to feel on the same team, and the lower levels of the organization are actually going to respond more favorably to the higher levels of the organization. The book explains there will always be differences in responsibilities in an organization. People are going to have different jobs, but the more we can eliminate these outward signs of authority, of superiority, of Big-Shotness, the better our organizations are going to function. This is all just as true within our families. I thought of a few of these trappings of leadership that I see often in parenting. These outward manifestations of parents viewing themselves as superior to their children, perhaps immune to their own rules that they impose on their children. And I wanted to talk about a few of these. These are distinctions that I have really tried to collapse in my own parenting to help me feel more on the same page as Brea, and also to help her feel more on the same page as me. I have really observed that as I have eliminated these distinctions between us, she actually tends to follow what I want to do more often because she sees that we're on the same team. We are united in all these little day-to-day ways. It only makes sense for her to continue following me because I'm already doing what I'm asking her to do most of the time. The very first one I thought of is bedtime. I have heard countless stories about parents struggling with bedtime, and I remember even growing up as a babysitter, I really had a hard time sometimes getting kids to go to bed. And honestly, I think it makes sense. I remember being a little kid, and when we would go to bed, I kind of felt a little bit sad, like my parents were gonna go have fun without me. There's nothing wrong with parents having time to themselves. However, the message we might accidentally be sending to our kids is that we need them to go away so that we can enjoy ourselves. Even if we justify that by saying that kids need an earlier bedtime, going to bed early is healthy for them, we still contradict that when we we as the parents then stay up late watching Netflix, being on our phones, scrolling, when these are things that we obviously wouldn't want our kids to do. My husband and I have actually shifted our alone time to the mornings before Brea, my daughter, wakes up. We all go to bed at the same time every night around 8 or 9 p.m. And honestly, I can count on one hand the number of times that Brea has given us any resistance to going to bed, because to her, it just makes sense. We're all going to bed. She's not going to miss out on anything. It's not like her parents are putting her in her bed so that they can have fun without her, but it's just like we're all on the same team. Going to bed right now is a good thing for all of us, and it just makes sense. I don't think she even needs to question it, because it is just what our family does. Another one I thought of is the standards that parents set for their children in relation to snacks and food. There are so many double standards here. Often parents will force children to clean their plates before they're allowed to leave the dinner table, whereas they would never force themselves to finish a meal just so that their plate could be clean. Also, sometimes parents will refuse to let their children eat snacks when they're hungry. They really want them to wait until the next meal, but I'm sure if the adult was hungry or felt as hungry as a child, they would let themselves eat a little snack, even if it meant eating a snack close to mealtime. Something else is parents not wanting their kids to eat lots of sweets and treats, and yet having treats that are reserved exclusively for the parents. Even if your kids don't ever witness you eating a treat, the incongruence between what you're telling your kids to do and the way that you want your kids to eat versus how you are eating is going to spoil your relationship with your child a little bit. It is going to get in the way of you being a genuine, honest parent to them. The same thing goes for when we don't want our kids to use screens, and yet we sneak away to go on our phone, or when they go to sleep, we end up just doom scrolling, doing the exact thing that we don't want our kids to be doing. All of these privileges we give ourselves that we don't want to give our kids because we say it's good for them to not have these privileges. It's setting a double standard where it's going to make it harder for us to be as confident as leaders to our children, and it's going to make it harder for our children to trust us. A few more I can think of are allowing ourselves to have preferences, but not allowing our children to. I don't know about you guys, but there is definitely a bowl in our kitchen that I love. It's my favorite bowl, and if I can eat my yogurt out of that bowl every morning, I'm a happy camper. Of course, I can use a different bowl if that one's not available, but I do have a preference. I have a favorite bowl, and yet when our kids have favorite dishes, or they decide they want a different color dish for breakfast one day, we act like they're being entitled or spoiled, whereas really it's just a preference. And it's not wrong for humans to have preferences. Also, we often expect our children to respond immediately when we want their attention. Even if they're in the middle of playing something, if it's time to go, we want them to leave immediately, or we just want them to obey immediately. And yet, when our children ask us for help, sometimes we, simply because we're the parent and we tell ourselves a story that our kids shouldn't be bossing us around, we almost intentionally make them wait because we want to prove to them that they can't have everything they want immediately. Humans are naturally going to learn that in life, that you can't always have everything you want immediately, but artificially creating that for our children while simultaneously expecting them to give us what we want immediately is pretty hypocritical. And again, creating this distinction between us and our children that is going to make it hard for us to connect to them and hard for us to lead them. Often parents also expect their kids to be constantly learning and growing. They'll throw their kids into a million sports and extracurricular activities to try to develop their children and make them more impressive than their peers, while the parent themselves isn't actually engaging in any kind of structured learning or growth. If we want our kids to be continuous learners, then let's collapse this distinction between ourselves and them and find our own interests and passions that we can engage in the same way that we want them to. And finally, a lot of parents will try to bolster their authority and the way they view themselves by not letting their kids know about the mistakes they've made in the past, or even the mistakes they're making now, refusing to apologize, or if their child is dealing with some weakness that they, the parent, once had, not being willing to admit, hey, I used to struggle with that too, here's how I got through it. The solution to all of this is we need to question the privileges we are giving ourselves but not giving to our children, and ask ourselves the same question that Arbinger encourages organizations to ask in this book. What trappings of leadership or parenthood currently exist in the organization or in our family, and which of these make good business sense? Which ones make sense, whereas which ones are not helping the business? And in most cases, a lot of them are not helping the business, and they're not helping the family. What can we do to collapse the distinctions between leaders and others in the organization? I wanted to share some scriptural examples of how great leaders in the scriptures do this with their organizations, with the people that they lead. Again, I'm going to talk about Jesus because he is the best example. From the very moment of his birth, Jesus Christ rejected the trappings of leadership. He was born to a poor couple in a manger in Bethlehem. When Satan came tempting Jesus at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus rejected Satan's offer of political dominance and worldly grandeur. Satan said, "I will give you all this power if you will fall down and worship me." And Jesus said, "Get thee hence, Satan." Instead, he chose obedience and self-sacrifice. Another time, after Jesus had fed the 5,000 using only 5 loaves and 2 fishes, the crowd tried to come and take him and force him to be their king. Understandably, because he demonstrated he had incredible power from God. But Jesus departed into a mountain to be by himself when this happened. Instead of accepting earthly kingship, Jesus withdrew and he rejected the public acclaim and political power. Jesus was also known for eating with publicans and sinners. He identified with the poor, the outcast, and the unclean. All of his associations overturned the elite social expectations of the leaders that were in power at the time, of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who wouldn't even associate with anyone who was below them. When he made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, he rode on a donkey, and up until his final moment, he demonstrated servant leadership. He washed the feet of his disciples and told them that if I've washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. He set an example, and he didn't hold himself above those around him in any way, shape, or form. I love all of these examples of how Jesus Christ collapsed these distinctions between himself and the people he served, the people he led. And it's amazing because even though Jesus never tried to give himself a crown or any glory, he had so many followers, and he continues to have more and more followers today. All this without ever demanding that anyone respect his authority or asking to be given a crown or any privilege that he wouldn't also extend to those around him. The other scriptural example I want to talk about is that of King Benjamin in the Book of Mormon. King Benjamin is the prime example of collapsing distinctions between leaders and those they lead. And I'm just going to read his words from Mosiah 2, starting with verse 10. He says, "I have not commanded you to come up hither that you should fear me, or that you should think that I of myself am more than a mortal man. But I am like as yourselves, subject to all manner of infirmities in body and mind. I have been suffered to spend my days in your service, even up to this time, and have not sought gold, nor silver, nor any manner of riches of you. And even I myself have labored with my own hands that I might serve you, and that you should not be laden with taxes, and that there should nothing come upon you which was grievous to be borne." That last verse especially embodies how this king was an incredible leader in that he actually labored with his own hands alongside his people. He didn't want to impose heavy taxes on them, so he did everything in his power to avoid that, even if it meant working himself in order to provide a living for himself. And that really shows how he didn't view himself as better than anyone he was leading. We see in the scriptures that he had so many people who wanted to follow him and listen to him. And I think that is largely because of the way that he collapsed these distinctions between himself and them. They knew that he didn't see himself as better than them. They knew that he took them seriously. He saw them as whole people, just as whole as himself. And that inspired them to follow him. In the same way, I would encourage you to look for ways that you can collapse the distinctions between yourself and your children. How can you involve them in your daily activities? What can you do to stop separating what the parent does from what the child does, and instead engage with them in the chores that you invite them to do, and also invite them to take part in the chores that typically only you do? How can you remove the double standards, whether that be in screen time or in eating desserts or immediate obedience? Another one I didn't mention earlier but I thought of is impulsive shopping. So many times our kids want something impulsively at the store and we act like they're totally crazy, and then we go home and we impulsively buy ourselves something on Amazon. How can we remove these distinctions between what we expect of our kids and what we expect from ourselves? As I've done this between myself and my 2-year-old Brea, I have felt so much more love for her and understanding for where she's at. I have a lot more patience because I can see why her situation can be frustrating for her sometimes. And also, she feels a lot more empowered than she would if I was putting up these walls and differences between us all the time. As I have invited Brea to work out with me, to cook with me, to clean with me, do everything that I want to do, and I've made her a part of it, we just become in sync. It's not like we're both living by this script of this is what a parent does, this is what a child does, and we're in two opposite universes, but it's really like, no, we're just on the same team. And I'm able to see her as not really my child that I own, and not myself as this parent who has this great role and responsibility over her, but simply see the truth that in eternity, we are sisters. We are both children of God, and although I might have a little more earth life experience than her, we really are very much alike. Involving her in my day-to-day activities helps me get out of this role that society has constructed that we call parent, and instead think of myself as her sibling who wants to help her and guide her and walk beside her in this earth life. I hope this episode was helpful for you. If you haven't read The Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute yet, please go do that. Also, the Arbinger Institute has an amazing podcast that is called Leading Outward, all about having an outward mindset. The podcast is really cool because you can hear coaches from the Arbinger Institute talk with leaders about how they can implement changes in their organizations. Every single one of these episodes that I listen to totally applies to parents as well. Every challenge that I listen to these organizational leaders, these CEOs encounter, there is some parallel challenge in parenting that I've experienced and that I can be benefited from learning the mindset that I want to approach these challenges with. I will add a link to that podcast in the show notes. This episode would be a really good one to send to someone that is just getting started in their parenthood, because like that McKinsey study found, organizations that address mindsets up front are 4 times more effective than those that overlook the mindset forming stage. There's no better time to develop your mindset as a leader and as a parent than right now. Even if you don't have kids yet, if you are expecting children, this is a really good time to start thinking about how you want to think about your children. And honestly, I have found for myself that the more productively and selflessly I can think about my children, the easier my role as a parent becomes, because I don't have to even strategize or come up with nifty methods to get my kids to do anything. All I have to do is be the best version of myself and treat them the way that I would want to be treated. And that can actually come really naturally to me when I have the proper mindset. Thanks so much for listening. Leave a review and rating for the podcast. Share this episode with a friend, and I will talk to you all next week.